Hey, this is Andrew Bristansky, and today, I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about two speedy 28mm, the Voigtlander Nokton 28mm f1.5 and the Thypoch Simera 28mm f1.4. So I'm really happy. I got both of these lenses in my possession at the same time. So the 28 was sent to me by Thypoch themselves to review. I already have reviewed the 35mm and I really liked it. So I've had it in my possession for the past few weeks, formulating my content for a review. And in the middle of all this, I swung by Camtec and I saw that they had a few of these 28mm in stock. And I really want to try one of these too. So with each of their blessings, I have both of these lenses in my possession and the okay to compare them, which is definitely what we all want to do. I've seen a few videos on YouTube, going over the details, and I think they're all great. And I just want to, elaborate a little bit further because I've had the chance and the opportunity to pin these two against each other as I do normally. And I've come to certain conclusions, which I'm very excited to share with you because, I've always been a 35mm shooter, being perfectly candid. 28mm always just seemed like the entry-level kit lens, focal length. It's not quite wide enough, not quite 35. But as I've kind of embraced my roots as a 50mm shooter, suddenly 21mm and 28mm start making more sense to me. What do you know? Suddenly we have this plethora of 28mm at our disposal, because a few years ago that was not the case. When I tried out the 28mm f2 Ultron, I love that lens, and now we have the 1.5, which reminds me a lot of it, and of course this Thypoch, which is a complete new entry to the game, and I'm very impressed by their quality, so I'm very excited to share my results with you guys. So let's start first and foremost with the build quality. Both these lenses are exquisite. They definitely give Leica a run for their money, and I think we're in this period where Leica no longer holds the fort as the best lens manufacturer with regards to build quality. We can push that aside. We can now embrace the fact that Cosina is pumping out just gem after gem after gem, and this Voigtlander is one of those gems. It's built so well, and this is the Type 1. There's the Type 2 as well that you can get, which is made out of brass, but I'm really liking the lightweight, aluminum finish on this guy. The matte finish is really nice too, and the build quality, it doesn't feel like there's any compromises. I haven't had the opportunity to try the brass one. Personally, I'd probably go for the brass Type 2, either the chrome or the black paints, undecided, but the finish on this guy is very similar to the black chrome on my M10. Well, it's no longer black chrome anymore, as you can see, but that I'll see for another date. But the finish is really nice, and I have to say that this doesn't feel like a compromise when I'm holding it. In fact, it feels pretty damn cool. Like, I could definitely justify saving the extra money and getting the Type 1 because you're also saving about 100 grams. The Voigtlander is your run-of-the-mill, Leica M mount lens. It's got your aperture on the front. Does what I don't like, that I didn't like about the 35 1.5 Nokton, which is 1.5 to f2 is a full stop. Why couldn't you just make it half stop? I mean, you're so close to 1.4 Voigtlander. Just give us that extra click, because it just makes me feel like I'm reminded of being robbed of a 1.4 lens when I'm stopping from 1.5 to f2 in one stop, and plus it gives you less control. But I digress. I can't complain. This is a super tiny lens for what it offers. This is 12 aperture blades, 10 elements in 8 groups, just a beast of a little lens. It is actually shockingly small. It's just what you've come to love from Voigtlander, now with an extra almost full stop. Now the Thypoch, on the other hand, no reputation to build up on, so they had to really just throw everything they got into this thing, and they did. This is 14 aperture blades, 11 elements in 7 groups, 49mm filter thread. This is a 43 here. It's got the most ridiculous distance scale here that we found on the 35. The aperture indents are clearly marked. It does do a few things that I'm not super fond of. One of them is the infinity lock. I find it kind of redundant. but I've gotten so used to it. The throw is not the same as you would find on a Leica lens, nor is it the same as the 35. So juggling between the 35 Simera and the 28mm Simera, I often find myself confused as to where I am, and muscle memory isn't kicking in because you can't, and then you have to rely on your rangefinder. So for street photography, especially if you're doing hyperfocal distance focusing, this is going to be something that you're going to have to get used to, because it's going to have to be pretty much your only 28mm or one of your only lenses. Let's say you have to get used to it basically. Another thing that I have to point out is, while this Nokton it stops down in half stop clips from f1.5 to f16, the Simera does exactly what the 35 does, which is it stops in third stop increments. So third stops to f2, third stops to 2.8, third stops to f4, 4 to 5.6, half stops, 5.6 to f8, half stops, and then f8 to f11 to f16, full stops. So for someone that doesn't like to look at his gear when he's using it, especially for street photography, that's annoying, because you're just having fun with the clicks, but you're unaware of where you are. You can't gauge it. Whereas this 28mm Nokton, 1.5 to f2, one full stop, and then 2 to 2.8 is half stops. Whatever, I guess you gotta live with it. I do like the distance scale. I like the declickable aperture, and it basically opens up an entire world for this lens to be used, namely video. And you've got another really cool thing that very few other lenses have. This is unique to Simera in the entire Leica lineup. It's the only 28mm lens that I know of for Leica that is internally focusing. The entire body does not show you that you're focusing. It's only the rear element that goes back and forth. Really nice. You've got an indent when you hit 0.7 meters, so your Leica rangefinder is going to no longer be calibrated beyond that point. Whereas the Voigtlander, when you swing it down to 0.7, it just keeps going down to 0.5. And speaking of focus throw, the Voigtlander over here, even though you can bring it down to 0.5 meters, which is further than this one, because the Simera goes to 0.4, which is a big difference when we're talking 28mm, by the way. That's a noticeable difference. But there's no indent, so you're unaware of when you're swinging this thing down to its minimum focusing distance. And what I wasn't too fond of was the fact that the throw is very similar to a Leica lens, which is nice, which is obviously a step ahead of the Simera. I find the throw is long but inconsistent, and not really, I can't really base it off of another lens. The Voigtlander here, the Nokton, feels exactly like a Leica. You're at 45 degrees here, which my thumb goes, my finger here, my index finger goes right into muscle memory mode, and I ramp it out. But it does feel a little bit off of where I would put my finger on, let's say, my Sumilux. It's not quite 45 degrees, and then by the time you're getting close to your 45 degree mark, which is where your 0.7 would be, you're actually closer than 0.7 meters, and then now you're at the 0.5. So muscle memory can't really kick in on this lens either. I do like the throw. It's very short for what it is, and I like the version 1. I really gotta say I'm impressed. All in all, I would give these two a tie if I'm comparing them, if I'm ranking them with regards to their build quality. They both feel like tanks. The Simera is actually shockingly well built. It feels actually better built than the 35, which is already saying a lot. And I think this lens is pretty much like comparing it to, let's say, a Distagon or something like that. Everything's dampened, the clicks, the aperture, everything just feels smooth. Because this is a new lens, so not many people are going to be talking about this or have even ever handled one of these. So rest assured, this thing holds its own against every other lens I've ever used. It feels very up to the task, and I use my lenses, and this guy hasn't really shown me any signs of not trusting it. And the same thing goes for the 35. So hats off to Thypoch. They've really built a fantastic lens. The Voigtlander, Cosina's reputation precedes them. Fantastic lens, really well built. This is just building upon their amazing portfolio they already have. Let's talk about that optical qualities now. So let's start first with vignetting. They're both fast 28mm lenses. They both vignette a lot. The Voigtlander definitely vignettes more than the Thypoch. It's noticeable. When you're using it, when you're looking at the screen and you're not coating the lens, which I don't use these lenses coated, especially for the sake of comparing them and reviewing. I want to just see what they're pumping out organically. The Nokton really remind me of the Ultron, which is to say when you're looking at the images on the screen, it's really hard to gauge what the final image is going to look like. And I'm very lazy when it comes to my photos. I like to appreciate the lens for what it is, and I like to just dive into my images and then tweak them, which is one of the reasons why I love having a Leica M, a digital M that is, because I don't have to do much to the images. I get to see the results in front of my face, and usually I just do some little tweaking, apply filter, whatever, but not a lot. With the 28mm from Voigtlander, I always find myself having to really work around the files. So now with regards to vignetting, I have to accommodate for that. So far there's no Lightroom profile for the 28 1.5, so I'm using the 28 f2. It's doing a good job at fixing some of the distortion as well as the vignetting. Now for the Simera here, it vignettes as well, but not as much as the Voigtlander, so that's something to say. Now we're gonna talk about the fringing. The Thypoch is fantastic. That's why I'm saying that this lens might be just really well suited for video because of that lack of chromatic aberration, lack of vignetting, warmer colors, the fact that you can declick the aperture. Voigtlander, on the other hand, has a lot of chromatic aberration, a lot of purple fringing. You know, it's got a few more optical imperfections despite being a very sharp lens. Bokeh now, the bokeh out of the Thypoch is phenomenal, like gorgeous. Like back to talking about that Mandler look, this is really reminiscent of your Mandler Sumiluxes. This thing has this nice, beautiful, glowy, low contrast, great subject separation, great micro contrast. This lens is beautiful. I think it's one of the nicest lenses I've used, and I'm just shocked that I'm saying that from a Chinese lens that came out last year. Like really, I can't tell you how impressed I am by the rendering of this lens. The Voigtlander is a modern lens. Like when I said it reminds me of the Zeiss Distagon, it does, but it has more character. It's got this cat eye bokeh as it tapers towards the edges. I mean, just look at the sheer size of this thing. It is tiny. They're putting a lot of lenses into this little package, so there are going to be compromises, and the bokeh, call it a compromise because I'm going to call it a compromise, is one of them, because you do get this optical vignetting in the bokeh balls, which leads to this kind of swirly look, but at the same time you get this field curvature that you don't get with the Thypoch. The images coming out of the Thypoch feel much bigger. You get more bokeh, and the bokeh continues towards the edges, whereas with the Voigtlander, they taper off, and it kind of defeats a lot of the purpose of having such a fast lens if you're only benefiting from having that speed at shorter distances where the bokeh can really come out and be its own. Whereas this guy, the Thypoch, is just kind of always just there until it's not, which is really nice, part of that predictability that I really value about the Thypoch. So bokeh, I would say, depends on your style, depends on your preferences, but if you're a Leica shooter and you like Leica M lenses, the Thypoch is very, very Leica-esque, and the Voigtlander is Zeiss punchy. You know, it's got that nice kind of glassy look that the Distagon has, that 3D high contrast modern look. This has more of that 3D high micro contrast look, this lower global contrast. But I do like it. I just think that if I'm gonna choose one or the other for bokeh, it'll be the Thypoch, for sure, for sure. The colors coming out of these are very different. The Voigtlander has colder colors in general, much cooler, and the Thypoch is much warmer. And I prefer the files coming in with the Thypoch consistently, and it actually helps me differentiate the lenses when I'm looking at, you know, which lens shot what when I was looking at my test footage. But the Thypoch has just this nice warm kind of Mandler glow to it. It does remind me of, you know, older Leica lenses, which we all love. And the Voigtlander is much more modern, has a lot more contrast, more bite to it. The Thypoch has a lower contrast, kind of a glowy, airy feel to it, to the images, and I really appreciate the images coming out of this. The Voigtlander is kind of like having a Zeiss Distagon with more character, because it's got a lot of bite, it's got a lot of sharpness, a lot of contrast. And the Thypoch has a nice kind of like glowy, you know, airy feel to the images. It's just nostalgic, if I were to call it anything. So when we're going to talk about sharpness now, the Voigtlander is just really as sharp as you want it to be. It does not have a floating lens group like the Thypoch does, but my God, this 28mm from Voigtlander is as sharp as they come. It is wonderful. At infinity, I did not notice any fluctuations in sharpness. At 1.5 even, it was already sharp. And then stopping it down just brings things up to another level. It's as sharp as you want it to be. At f2, 2.8, the vignetting starts dissipating and you're just greeted with this modern optical marvel. Then the Simera, on the other hand, it's decently sharp wide open. All in all, this lens has been sharp enough, which is really what I want. Up close, it's also sharp enough. The images have a lot of bite to them, but not too much sharpness. And the contrast and everything just kind of flow together really well. So I don't think I'm asking for too much from this lens, but definitely the sharpness is better on the Nokton here. But at the end of the day, these are two fantastic lenses, and the image quality is very consistent on this Simera when we're talking about just what to predict for when you're shooting, which is, I'll get into that in a second. Now we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is price. The Voigtlander is about $1,000 and the Thypoch is $700, $699. And for that $300 difference, that's where you use your judgment. Money is an issue. I would say go for the Thypoch. And the size difference is noticeable, but it's not, it's not going to make me choose one or the other that much in the end. The Voigtlander is definitely smaller by a good margin. 43mm filter threads versus 49, but all in all, it's not a huge difference for me, and I like them both. They're beautiful little lenses. They are good. They're really nice looking lenses, I gotta say. The distortion on the Voigtlander is a barrel distortion, very minor, and then the Thypoch has a pincushion distortion, which is a little bit more pronounced, but also not noticeable in real life. I shoot both these lenses uncoded, and I've never really felt the need to correct for distortion. So the Thypoch, I would say go for it if you're into hybrid shooting, if you value having good image performance out of the box, you like that old classic Leica Mandler glow of the Sumiluxes. Go for the Voigtlander if you're someone who likes to work on your images a little bit more, you value size over anything else. You want to have something a little bit more funky with bokeh. You value sharpness, but you don't mind editing your pictures because you're going to have to edit out that purple fringing because it's very apparent. But really, there's not many compromises other than the bokeh, which is subjective, and the sharpness is fantastic, but it's really that vignetting for me and the chromatic aberrations that bother me the most. Bokeh is nice still, but still better bokeh on the Thypoch and less chromatic aberrations and very nice warm imagery coming out of the Thypoch. So it really depends at the end of the day. There's no winner here and there's no loser. They're both very good lenses. We're spoiled this day and age by having these fast 28mm at our disposal, and I would say you'll be happy with either one you choose. So let me know what you guys think, which one you prefer. I'll see you guys in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. And thank you once again, Camtec, for supplying the Voigtlander, and Thypoch for supplying the 28mm from them. Cheers.